I used to have a budget spreadsheet with 41 categories: rent, groceries, groceries treats, guilty about it, gas, rideshare, coffee out with friends, which was somehow a different category than regular coffee. I built it over a weekend, color-coded, formulas linking every tab to every other tab, genuinely proud of it. I remember showing it to a friend like I'd built something impressive, and in a way it just wasn't the thing I thought it was. I gave up on updating it completely within 6 weeks. Here's the part that actually surprised me. The month I stopped tracking 41 categories and started tracking exactly 3, I was in better financial shape than I'd ever been with the spreadsheet running. Not despite doing less. Because of it. This isn't a video about cutting things out of your life. It's about something almost nobody tells you. That the more complicated a money system gets, the more likely you are to abandon it entirely, and the people with the most stable finances usually aren't running the most sophisticated systems. They're running the simplest ones that actually survive contact with a bad week. Let's run a quick experiment. 2 people, same starting point, both trying to stick to a plan. Person 1 has a detailed system, dozens of spending categories, several bank accounts for different goals, 3 credit cards optimized for different reward categories, a rule for almost every kind of purchase. Person 2 has 3 rules, total, and nothing else. 6 months later, which one is still following their system? There's real research behind why the answer is usually person 2. In the late 90s, a psychologist named Sheena Iyengar set up a tasting table at a grocery store. Some hours, she displayed 24 flavors of jam. Other hours, just 6. More people stopped to browse the 24-flavor table. But when it came to actually buying something, the 6-flavor table sold 10 times more jam. More options drew a crowd. More options didn't create more buyers. It created more people who walked away without deciding at all. Watch what happens when the same idea gets tested on something that actually matters. Iyengar later studied hundreds of thousands of employees and their retirement plans, and found that participation dropped as the number of investment fund choices went up. Plans offering just a couple of funds saw roughly 3 out of 4 employees participating. Plans offering 50 or more options saw participation fall into the low 60s. Same free money sitting on the table in every single plan. The only thing that changed was how many decisions stood between an employee and actually claiming it. That's the first myth worth killing. We assume more options and more granular control add up to better outcomes. Past a certain point, they mostly add up to more reasons to quit. There's a whole subculture built around the opposite belief, that real financial sophistication means squeezing out every possible advantage. Churning credit cards for sign-up bonuses, spreading savings across 4 different high-yield accounts because one bank's rate is 0.1% higher this month, tracking every subscription, every basis point of possible optimization. I tried a version of this myself for about 4 months. 3 different savings accounts at 3 different banks, chasing whichever one had the best rate that quarter. I remember spending an entire Sunday afternoon transferring $900 between 2 of them to capture an extra few dollars of interest over the year. I never once calculated whether the hours I spent doing that were worth more than the money I was chasing. They weren't, not by a wide margin. The optimization wasn't free. It was just priced in hours instead of dollars, and I hadn't been counting the hours at all. By the time I added up the 3 logins, 3 sets of alerts, and 3 separate mental notes about which account was the good one this month, the 0.1% had cost me more in quiet background stress than it ever paid out in interest. So here's what a genuinely minimalist money system actually looks like, and it isn't an absence of structure. It's structure with almost nothing left to decide in the moment. Rule 1, track one number, not 41, instead of categories for coffee, rideshare, and groceries, treats, guilty about it. Track your savings rate, the percentage of your income that goes towards savings and investing every month, full stop. Everything else, you're allowed to spend on whatever you want, as long as that 1% gets hit first. I still remember the exact moment I deleted that spreadsheet. It didn't feel like giving up. It felt like putting down something I'd been carrying with both hands for months, for no reason at all. Picture checking your finances under each system. Under the old one, I'd open a dozen tabs, cross-reference categories, and still walk away unsure whether I was actually on track. Under the new one, I check exactly one number once a month. It either went up, stayed flat, or went down, and that single fact tells me almost everything I actually needed to know. The 41 categories felt like more information. The one number was more useful information. There's a modern version of this same trap worth naming, because it hides behind the word automatic. Plenty of budgeting apps now auto-sort every transaction into dozens of categories for you, which feels like it should solve the problem. The app is doing the work, not you. But if you're still opening that app every week to review and correct 30 categories, the automation didn't remove the complexity. It just moved who was generating it. The test isn't whether a tool is automated, it's whether the number of things demanding your attention actually went down. I know what some of you are thinking, and it's a fair objection. This sounds easy for someone with one paycheck and one modest goal. What about multiple income streams, a small business, dependents, a more complicated life? Here's the honest answer. The rules don't shrink to fit a simpler life. The number of rules stays small. Only the size of each one changes. Someone with 3 income streams still tracks one savings rate. It's just calculated against a more complicated total. Someone running a small business still picks one broad investment approach for their personal accounts, even if the business itself requires more detailed bookkeeping. Complexity in your life doesn't require complexity in your money rules. If anything, the more complicated everything else already is, the more that argues for keeping the money part as few decisions as possible. Rule 2, and this is where minimalism gets an unfair reputation for being less sophisticated. Pick one broad, low-cost investment approach instead of trying to pick winning stocks. Here's a number worth sitting with. Independent research that tracks actively managed funds against simple market benchmarks has found that over 15-year stretches, somewhere around 85 to 90% of actively managed funds fail to beat a simple, low-cost index fund tracking the broader market. Not most years. Most funds, over most long stretches, run by professionals paid specifically to beat that simple option. The complicated approach isn't just harder to maintain. On average, over long periods, it doesn't even win. I spent hours during those 2 brokerage years comparing companies, reading earnings reports, feeling like a real investor for doing it. I wasn't wrong to be curious. I was wrong to assume the complexity was doing something the simple option couldn't. There's a myth attached to this one too, that real diversification requires carefully picking a mix of many different funds, weighted just right, rebalanced constantly. A widely cited study in finance tested that exact assumption directly, comparing 14 increasingly sophisticated portfolio optimization models against the simplest possible alternative, just splitting money evenly across a handful of broad funds and leaving it alone. Across 7 different real-world datasets, not one of the 14 sophisticated models consistently beat the simple, evenly split approach once real-world uncertainty was factored in. The fancier math wasn't wrong, exactly. It just required a level of precise, forward-looking prediction that reality never actually provides. If you've watched the video on the order money should move through before it reaches investing at all, this rule slots into the very last door, the one that comes after the match, the debt, the emergency fund, and the tax-advantaged accounts. Even that door, the one furthest from certainty, doesn't need to be complicated to be effective. One broad fund, chosen once, tends to outperform a rotating collection of clever picks. For the same reason, a simple rule beat 14 complicated models in that study. Certainty was never really the point of the complexity. It just felt like it was. Rule 3 is the one this channel has quietly been building toward the whole time. Automate the decision once, instead of making it every payday. If you've watched the videos on emergency funds or on the order money should move through, you already know this one. The minimalist version of money management isn't about having fewer things you care about. It's about deciding, one time, exactly what happens to every dollar so payday never turns into 41 small negotiations with yourself. Here's a quick experiment. Picture someone opening their banking app on payday. Person 1 now sees the money already split. Savings rate met, investments made, bills covered, before they've even finished their coffee. Person 2 sees one large number and a mental checklist of 11 things they're supposed to remember to do with it before Friday. Same amount of money. One of them is making 11 decisions this morning, the other is making 0. I'll admit this one took me the longest to actually trust. Handing a decision to an automatic transfer felt, for a while, like losing control rather than gaining it. It wasn't until a friend pointed out that I'd already handed my rent and my phone bill to autopay years ago, without a second thought, that I noticed the double standard. I trusted automation completely for the money leaving my account, and not at all for the money staying in it. Rule 4 is smaller than the others, but it quietly makes the whole system easier to keep. Fewer accounts and fewer cards than you think you need. One checking account, 1 or 2 savings accounts, clearly named for their purpose. 1 or 2 cards, not 5. This isn't about deprivation. It's about the fact that every additional account is one more login, one more statement, one more place a small mistake can hide unnoticed for months. When I actually counted, I'd been juggling 11 separate logins across banks, cards, and old accounts I'd technically never closed. I'm down to 4 now. Nothing about my financial life is less capable than it was with 11. It's just no longer possible for a fee or a forgotten balance to hide in a corner I never check. It's also worth noticing that the financial industry doesn't have much incentive to tell you this. A bank makes more from you juggling 5 accounts and forgetting about 1 than it does from you keeping things simple enough to actually watch closely. Every additional product is another relationship, another fee opportunity, another reason you're less likely to ever fully leave. Simplicity isn't just good for your attention, it's mildly inconvenient for an industry that often profits from your confusion. A friend of mine spent a weekend closing 3 accounts she hadn't touched in years and canceling 2 cards she kept. She described the following Monday as strangely quiet, not because anything about her income or her goals had changed, but because there were simply fewer places for her attention to get pulled toward. She told me it felt less like simplifying her finances and more like finally being able to see all of them at once for the first time in years, instead of catching glimpses of different pieces scattered across 5 different apps. My aunt, the same one who was aggressively paying down a low-interest mortgage instead of claiming her employer match, also had 6 different credit cards at one point, each one optimized for a slightly different reward category. She once described trying to remember which card to use at which store as a part-time job with no salary. She's down to 2 now, and she says she's never once missed a reward worth the mental math it used to cost her. There's a version of this idea that's older than any of us, and it's worth naming because it shows this isn't a new trend dressed up in minimalist branding. A popular framework called the 50-30-20 approach, roughly half your income to needs, 30% to wants, 20% to savings and debt, was popularized about 2 decades ago as a way to simplify budgeting down to 3 numbers instead of dozens. It isn't the only version of a simple rule that works, and it isn't right for every income or situation. But the instinct behind it, 3 categories instead of 41, has outlasted plenty of more detailed systems that came and went in the years since. Precisely because 3 numbers are something a person can actually hold in their head on a Tuesday. Now, I want to head off an assumption some of you might be making right now, that minimalism here just means less effort or not caring as much. It's closer to the opposite. There's a well-documented idea in decision science that people operating under real-time pressure and real uncertainty, emergency room doctors, chess players with seconds on the clock, often rely on a handful of simple rules of thumb rather than exhaustively weighing every variable, and frequently make better calls that way than someone trying to calculate every possibility from scratch. A doctor triaging a chest pain patient in a crowded emergency room isn't running a dozen tests before deciding who gets seen first. They're using a short list of a few critical signs, refined over years, because a short list is something that can actually be applied correctly under pressure, in seconds, every single time. Researchers studying this same effect found something almost backwards when they asked people to guess which of two cities had a larger population using nothing but which name they recognized. In some versions of the test, people who recognized fewer cities, and therefore had less information to work with, guessed correctly more often than people who knew both cities well. More knowledge, used carelessly, occasionally got in the way of the one simple signal that actually mattered. Simplicity, used well, isn't the lazy version of expertise. It's frequently what expertise looks like once it's been lived in long enough to know which details actually matter and which ones were only ever noise. If any of this sounds right, but your own setup is currently closer to my old spreadsheet than to any of these 4 rules, simplifying doesn't have to happen all at once. Pick the account you check the least, the card you use the least, or the budget category that's clearly redundant, and remove exactly one thing this week. Not all 41 categories. 1. Close the account, cancel the card, or merge the category, and give yourself a month before touching anything else. A reasonable order to work through it, if it helps to have one. Close unused accounts first, since those carry the least risk to untangle. Then consolidate cards down to 1 or 2. Then collapse spending categories into a small handful. Then, only at the end, automate the transfers that make the whole thing self-sustaining. The goal isn't a dramatic overhaul finished by Friday. It's proving to yourself that removing something doesn't make your finances less controlled. It usually makes them the first time you've felt in control of them at all. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud, and it's the actual reason any of this works. A complicated system doesn't fail because the person running it isn't disciplined enough. It fails because complexity has a maintenance cost, paid in attention, every single day it exists. And attention is the one resource nobody has an unlimited supply of. A simple system has almost no maintenance cost at all. It just runs. That difference is the entire reason person 2 from earlier is still following their plan 6 months later, while person 1 quietly stopped somewhere around week 3, the same way I quietly stopped updating a spreadsheet with a category for guilty grocery treats. This matters most exactly when it's hardest to think clearly, which is usually the moment complexity does the most damage. A stretch of real financial stress narrows how much mental bandwidth is available for anything else, which means a complicated system is most likely to collapse at precisely the moment you can least afford for it to. A simple system doesn't ask anything extra of you during a hard month. It was already built to run itself before the hard month arrived. Fast forward 5 years for both of them, and imagine the same rough patch hits at once. Reduced hours at work, a few unexpected bills stacked close together. The one running 4 accounts, 6 categories, and a rotating list of credit cards to optimize, finds the whole structure quietly falling apart under the stress. A missed transfer here, a forgotten card payment there, small cracks appearing in a system that only ever worked when nothing went wrong. The one running 3 rules and 1 automated system barely notices the strain. The rules don't require energy they don't have. They just keep running, the same way they always have, because they were never built to depend on a good week in the first place. I think about that spreadsheet a lot, not because it was a bad idea, exactly, but because of how much effort went into building something that couldn't survive a single busy month. The version that replaced it took me 20 minutes to set up. It's been running, untouched, for 2 years. Minimalism, in money, was never about wanting less. It was about building something simple enough to actually last. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about understanding money in a way that actually works in real life, not just on a whiteboard. That's exactly what this channel is all about. Every week, I break down personal finance, investing, budgeting, and wealth building into simple, practical lessons anyone can use. If that sounds like something you'd find valuable, consider subscribing. I'd love to have you here. Because the next time you're tempted to build a more detailed system to finally get your money under control, ask yourself the only question that actually matters. Not whether it's thorough enough, but whether it's simple enough to still be running 6 months from now. The most sophisticated financial plan in the world is worth exactly nothing the month you stop opening it.